right, and it looks like we are live now. Welcome to another live episode of Elevate Your Grind. I know these are popping up sporadically whenever we can do them. Listen, we're working around people's schedules here. We've got great guests that want to join us. We're going to try to get them a little bit more scheduled going forward. But for now, you can check us out every Monday and Thursday at 4:20. We're going to drop some recorded content, some great content that you should all check out. We're going to do as much as we can. Once we start doing these live, we're going to try to open it up to ask some questions. Just bear with us. We're a couple people just trying to figure this out. My guest today is somebody that I love in the cannabis industry, probably one of the first people that I can call a friend in this industry. I got lucky very early on in my career in this industry. I got to meet a lot of really great people that I connected with. Tyler was one of them. I had mentioned Chris Jensen when we talked to him, that there was a group of guys that were about to be dads again that had kind of brought me through the whole childhood or having a child experience. Tyler was probably the person I texted more than anybody else. Just let me know that everything was going to be okay, talked me off the ledge. Also told me how great it is to have a daughter as opposed to having a son. Nothing against sons, but you're right, Tyler. Daughters are awesome. So please welcome the Chief Revenue Officer of Hypur, Tyler Beuerlein. We caught him in the middle of working, so video may not be great, but I promise you he's got some great things to say. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Todd, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure, and glad to hear things are going so well with the little one. That's awesome.
Yeah, man. Well, you remember that the first time that we had met, you showed me on your phone, you're like, okay, I got to show you what it's like to have a daughter. And it was a video of your daughter playing flag football and just whooping on a bunch of guys.
Yeah, it was funny when we first started getting her into it. They were an all-girls team that played all-boys teams, and they did great. I mean, they didn't win the league, but they came pretty close. So it was pretty awesome to watch.
Very cool, man. Well, you are everywhere. Like I did a Google search of you, and like 100 talks came up. I like to do a little bit of my due diligence before the interviews. It was way too much due diligence to do for you, so I just decided to give up and figure I'd ask you directly. But you've got a really interesting career path because you started out, and I'm sure a lot of people know this about you, your first job was not like many other people had. You were part of the Mets organization.
Yeah, correct. I grew up in a really athletic family, and my uncles have played professional sports. It was just something we did. And so growing up here, baseball was my sport, my love, and I got the opportunity to do that professionally for a number of years. So that was my first entrance into the professional world, albeit in a different manner, but really fortunate to have that experience in my life.
Very cool, man. So you're in the Mets organization. As you told me, this was a time where the Mets had some studs on the roster. Unfortunately, we can't all be pros, but I think you ended up in a pretty good position. So I did a little digging into your background, and it seemed, did you study finance in school, or how did you end up going from, because I see this with a lot of athletes, going from professional sports into financial services. And to me, athletics has always been a place that kind of, it's the second best thing to the military as far as teaching you discipline and teamwork and really getting people to work together. How did you parlay, playing for the Mets into a career in financial services? Because that's a very cutthroat industry as it is.
My path has been really odd from the standpoint that when I got out of professional sports, I went to work for a private equity real estate company here in Arizona and kind of, cut my teeth there, so to speak. But I had an idea, I should say, for a beverage company. And so one of my very close friends was one of the founders of Four Loko. I went to him with a concept. We launched that company and had it for over 5 years. And so during that time, I learned a lot about challenging industries. I learned a lot about distribution networks, building a brand, and all of those things. And so at a certain point, when we came to very tough decisions as a company, I had met the founder of Hypur. And so I made a transition literally directly from that company into Hypur. And all of those tools and being around all of those people and people from different walks of life, all of those things have helped immensely here at Hypur. Because as you know, growing up in such a nascent industry, we've been in this for 6 years now, and we joke that they're dog years. And this industry is unlike any other. And so just very fortunate to have that kind of background that's helped me in every aspect of this industry.
So running your own business must have been awesome, but what you've got going on at Hypur, to me, I think is really unique, right? So 2015, you get involved with Hypur. You know, we're 5 years past the legalization in Colorado. You know, a lot of other states are coming online. What attracted you to Hypur, and how did you come across this company? Because obviously there was a huge need for it. So, I mean, it was almost to me like a no-brainer opportunity getting pitched on it.
Yeah, it was, and really I believed in the founders of this company, and I believe the fifth person in the company, and that includes ownership. And so again, very fortunate to meet our founder at the time I did, and we've had a really unique perspective on this industry since the beginning. So it's given me personally the ability to see things through a different light, and it's given me the ability to really help a lot of people in this industry. And again, just very fortunate to have that opportunity over the years.
No, very cool. And you guys have a great company there. The one thing that I love about Hypur, and I want to get back more into your career path, because I can only imagine what it was like back in 2015, you know, trying to build some of these relationships where 5 years later, it's a little bit more normalized, you know, during this whole pandemic where we're an essential service. But the one thing to me that sets you guys apart, because I've looked at the other payment companies, and I'm sure what they do is great, is you guys are native in the app stores, right? So for an end user, you know, there's a lot of crypto workarounds, a lot of different other things, but as an end user, even if there's a complete legitimate payment processing system, the fact that I can download the Hypur app on my iPhone, have that unique experience like any other app, almost like, I think some of the people I've talked to have said like a Venmo or a Cash App, and be able to have that experience when paying for this substance, to me, it should be a no-brainer for most. So how did you guys, you know, was it that you were early on, you were able to get into the app store? How are you able to have that competitive differentiator versus everybody else?
Well, look, let's kind of backtrack a little bit, because
Sure.
I think this is one, a testament to our founders and also to our organization. Our founders understood at the beginning, this is not a payment problem, it's a banking problem. And if you couldn't solve the regulatory compliance issues for banks and credit unions, the payment mechanism would never survive. And we've seen that play out over the last 6 years. Every payment provider that comes out to the marketplace, they launch, they fail, they get shut down, and then, you know, they leave a wake of carnage in the process. And so we started with bank compliance. And so when we launched 6 years ago, we were selling a new technology to banks and credit unions that didn't necessarily even want to talk about whether or not they were banking a federally illegal industry. And so it was very challenging. And we've had a really long, tough road, but we knew that if we built this right, we were going to give the industry a sustainable means of digital payment that has never been there in the past, and that's what we've done. And so as it stands today, over half of the banks and credit unions in the US that bank this industry to scale use our technology to do so. And as a result, that's enabled our payment products to go nationwide for the first time in our 6-year history. That happened about 8 months ago. So as we've built the bank compliance side and built that network, our team has been very steadfast on building a very predictable, sustainable, compliant payment method. And we've tried to keep that very simple for the consumer, and they've done that. And so right now, especially with COVID, we are spreading like wildfire. We've launched with many, if not most, of the multi-state operators. Many more are coming online, and we've got some really exciting announcements to make in the next few weeks.
Very cool, man. You guys are doing some great work, and I can only imagine how many more customers are coming online due to the need for curbside pickup and the need for delivery. And in my personal opinion, I think this is going to stick post-COVID. You know, the dispensaries are great. You know, now that I'm a patient here in Florida, when I go to California, it's an experience going in. You're on vacation, you're going to the dispensary. It's like going to the liquor store before you go back to the hotel with your friends, right? Here at home, I've got a life, I've got a family, I've got work. You know, delivery sounds pretty good. Having it here at 9:30 tomorrow morning, just meeting the delivery guy and then having it, not having to worry about it. Do you guys foresee that model kind of sticking around post-COVID?
Yeah, you know, it's been fascinating. We kind of joke, and look, this is bittersweet for us, right? I mean, we're booming as a result of this, but, you know, obviously these circumstances are not ideal. We want to be sympathetic to that as well. But, you know, for us, we feel like this has just sped up the inevitable. And I think what retailers in this world are realizing is, look, the retail consumer is the retail consumer. They know where they're going to go. They know what they're going to buy. They come in, they buy the product, they're gone. That's not the end game for this industry. The end game is the consumer that's maybe on the fringe, doesn't necessarily know they love cannabis yet, but it's going to be a part of their life. And you get to that consumer by providing convenience, sustainability, and compliance in a predictable transaction method. And that's where we really come in. And that's where we're going to become, and I don't say this boastfully, the backbone for this industry, because from a payment methodology standpoint, it's convenient. Again, it's predictable. We're not going anywhere. And that's why we built the model the way we did. So I would wholeheartedly agree with you. And in regards to COVID, we just launched a product called Safe Checkout, and that allows for, I'm going to say, a touchless experience between the delivery driver and the consumer, or at the dispensary, if it's a pre-order or curbside pickup. No longer do those parties have to physically interact to conduct a transaction. So all of those things are bringing the industry right through our door, and really, it's best for the industry anyways.
That's awesome, and I appreciate your humbleness, given the situation that we're going through right now. But, Hypur right now, and it seems like we're almost promoting this, but I'm just a big fan. You guys are one of the companies that are out there that are trying to make life as close to normal as possible, right? You're enabling these transactions to still happen, even though we have this massive pandemic going on, just like Zoom, right? Nobody's going to hate on Zoom except for there's some controversy with China and everything else. But as soon as this happened, everybody jumped on Zoom, and Zoom, like Microsoft and everybody else, is a company that is enabling us to be somewhat normal during these times. And I think Hypur is right up there with it, especially in the cannabis industry. It's amazing what you guys are doing. So you have that touchless experience. The one, I say, white whale that I haven't seen people really be able to solve is e-commerce. Are you guys working on that? If I remember correctly, you have a solution in place, or it's about to be launched, where it integrates directly into an e-commerce platform as well?
Correct. So our team has been working diligently on that. We've already launched a number of integrations on the delivery and pre-order side, essentially e-com. And so keep in mind, we're the method of monetary movement, right? So we can integrate to anything. We can enable any kind of monetary movement, provided that operator is operating in a legal manner. And so our entire dev team is in-house. They're phenomenal. We've got APIs built out for virtually any type of integration. And again, those are all the reasons why we're expanding so quickly.
Very cool. So I want to backtrack back to 2015 when you joined Hypur, and obviously it being a much different cannabis industry back then. I don't really know my timeline that well, but I can imagine you had Colorado, you had Washington, you had Oregon and California, maybe. I know a few other states maybe came online on the medical side, but at least on the adult use side. I'm assuming Arizona, because that's where you guys are. What was it like in those early days trying to make the relationships with financial institutions that are extremely conservative, but let's be honest, also like money and income, getting them to say, hey, we're going to help put together a solution to bank the cannabis industry, right? And I watched a talk that you gave for Benzanga right before this, and we love those guys, about saying how the most important thing to any bank is their charter. How do you get them to risk that charter in order to back this new industry, especially through a company like Hypur, which didn't exist before?
It was virtually impossible, Todd. I mean, we launched in Colorado with a beta product, and it wasn't just finding the financial institutions that were willing to have this conversation. It was also introducing a new technology that nobody ever knew existed in conjunction with that. So, it was kind of an insurmountable task. And then on top of that, regulatory bodies were very difficult at the beginning, as you can imagine. Yeah. So they didn't necessarily want financial institutions to bank a federally illegal industry. They didn't have any guidance. And so they were learning with everybody else. So I'll never forget our team. It might have been the first ever examination of an institution in the space, took the examination body out to lunch. And the question was posed to one of the examiners, do you have an FFIEC handbook for how to examine a financial institution banking this industry? The answer, of course, was no. It still doesn't exist. And so the next question naturally was, how do you examine an institution without any guidance? And they literally said, we're winging it. And so we went through this big learning process, not only trying to help the banks and credit unions, not only learning ourselves as a company and adjusting, but also every regulatory body was trying to learn with the group. So again, it's been a fascinating road. And I would say at the very beginning, it was extremely difficult to get new clients. Fast forward a few years, I would hope that at this point we've become, if not the subject matter expert, one of the top in our relationships in this industry, one extremely deep. Many, we don't talk about publicly, but all of those things have been a catalyst to now, again, over half of the banks and credit unions in the U.S. truly banking this industry to scale are our clients. And I don't know of another industry where a technology provider, in something this nascent could say something like that. So again, it's just a testament to our team and really to our partner banks and credit unions throughout the country.
So clearly, getting involved in that space has helped you guys out. One of the things I haven't mentioned yet is you also chair the NCIA Banking and Finance Committee as well, which we can find you all over the place giving talks. What, was that very instrumental in helping Hypur grow, or was that, I'm in the weeds here, I'm talking to the banks and credit unions, we're with the dispensaries, we're with the companies, we know how to bridge the gap here, but we need the NCIA to help. Which one was the cart, which was the horse? How did you get involved there?
Yeah, I got involved in NCIA about 2 years ago. And every year the NCIA elects a new chair. And I was fortunate to be appointed this last year. So, everything with Hypur, I think, has fueled our ability to communicate what's happening in the banking and payment space in real time in an effective manner. And so I think it was just a natural progression to align with the NCIA and try and give the member base accurate, actionable information on a topic that candidly has been so vastly misrepresented for years. And so I think it was just a natural progression for both to come together and align.
Sure. So, obviously we've talked a lot about Hypur and the advantage of using Hypur, right? And I'm a fan and I think you guys are doing great work. Let's talk about the industry as a whole. Back, I want to say when you guys started 2015, 2016, we'd see documentaries where dispensaries were looking for old banks because it had, bulletproof glass and vaults and everything else. And the industry was primarily using cash, right? Because it was cash payments. There wasn't really too much in the form of electronic payments. Maybe we saw some workarounds. If I was a new company and I'm looking, how do I find a bank that is banking the cannabis industry? And am I looking for a bank or credit union that is using Hypur versus one that's not? Where's the differentiator there?
Every market, as you know, in the cannabis space is its own planet. So that's from a licensing perspective, that's from a regulatory perspective, it's also from a banking perspective. So, any operator that's in need of a banking relationship, a couple things, I tell them never to deal with a third party. Your relationship should always be directly with a bank or credit union. One thing we've done since the beginning is anytime an operator has called us in need of help, we will pair them with the right bank or credit union depending on where they're operating, type of operator, and what their needs are, because we've been fortunate to be on the front lines and know who's doing what in each state. So we've done that free of charge. We believe it's the right thing for the industry. We're also trying to bring that into the NCIA. And so if any operator's in need, if they call the NCIA or if they call me directly or Hypur, we will pair them with the appropriate bank or credit union. And again, even if that client's not a client of Hypur, but it's the best option for that operator, we will make sure that they're introduced.
Sure. So, now we fast forward to 2020, you've been in the role for 5 years. You've got a lot of great relationships. What's it like today versus in the beginning when you sit down with a bank or credit union that's looking at banking the cannabis industry? Is it a different conversation? Is it a much friendlier conversation? Or are you still kind of knocking on a lot of doors saying, hey guys, you really should look at this industry. I have great respect for you. This is something you should really be doing in our state.
It's been a complete 180 for us, especially in the last 2 years, really in the last 18 months. Institutions are coming to us now. At the beginning, I used to have to be on the front lines, trying to get information, trying to find out who was banked where, so that I could go to those institutions and say, hey, look, you may be able to do this better with these tools. Let's sit down and have a conversation. And candidly, nobody would talk to us. Nobody, to get in a door was an act of God at that point. Now, fast forward, 5 years, financial institutions call us on a weekly basis. If a financial institution's evaluating this space, typically we find out through somebody in the industry through a phone call or an email. Again, we've been very fortunate for that dynamic to switch. So our focus is less on new bank and credit union clients, because again, that's coming in. Our focus now is shifted to launching our payment products nationwide, taking the counter, taking the industry through, whether it be integration with pre-order, delivery, wholesale, does not matter. We're in the process of becoming the means of monetary movement that's going to help this industry thrive.
So in the reality of it, if we were to compare you to a cannabis company, you guys essentially built out your grow before you built out your store, right? You had all the financial relationships in place before you started doing money movement. So
yeah, we built the foundation of bank and credit union clients that, again, took us nearly 6 years. But now that we're here and our payment products that are now able to go nationwide, it's a whole different world for us. And candidly, it's going to be a huge benefit to the industry in the long term.
Sure. So I know you give a lot of talks and you're very big on educating people, and you do a great job with banking. I read your articles a lot, and you dispel a ton of myths. How involved, if any, are you with some of the banking legislation that's coming down the pipe? And do you have any insight to when we're going to turn the corner and cannabis companies, because you're doing a great job with banking and cash transactions, but there's still lack of access to debt or loans or mortgages or anything else like that, and a lot of other business essentials. I mean, if we look at COVID, right, these companies may or may not and probably won't be eligible for SBA loans. So, how involved are you, we'll call it on the lobbying side and with the legislation that's coming down? And do you think we're going to see something sooner than later given the current state of affairs?
Yeah, so I think I'll start to answer that with the fact that, I don't think we've ever seen more irony in this industry when you've got people incarcerated for cannabis-related transactions, and yet states are deeming this an essential industry, right? So the further we go down this rabbit hole, the more the light is shining on this. And look, that translates to banking and financial services, and to your point about lending is a big issue. I think the SAFE Act has some real challenges, and we've been very vocal about that. And I think it's important for people to understand that there are other highly regulated industries that are perfectly legal that have the same, if not bigger, banking issues as cannabis. They just don't get the publicity. They're not as polarizing. And so I think that the SAFE Act needs to be adjusted to encompass all of those industries. But I think really the main catalyst for this is federal legality. Right? So the SAFE Act is not going to solve the issue for the branded card networks. They're not coming in until federal legality. They've been very vocal about that. The same, it may open up lending. I think it will help on the banking side. How much remains to be seen, but I don't think we're going to see any movement on that until after the election. And from a Hypur and from our perspective, we've been trying to be very vocal, whether it be with lobbying firms or we want to be a resource for people in government so they are making decisions based on accurate information. And at the NCIA, with the Policy Council, we've tried to be very vocal in support of the SAFE Act, in support of making the necessary changes to make it an effective piece of legislation.
Very cool, man. So just the last thing that we'll touch on before we let you go, because clearly you're one of us still at the office working, not only are you part of Hypur, but there's also Hypur Ventures as well. How involved are you guys in Hypur Ventures, and what kind of stuff are you looking at? What are you seeing down the pike that's really interesting?
Yeah, so Hypur Ventures was originally formed, the first fund was a small fund, took a stake in, I believe, 13 companies, and that fund did very well. And through our experience at Hypur, again, we've had a very unique perspective on this industry, not only through the financial system, but also from a transactional standpoint, because when there's a change of beneficial ownership, we're obviously aware of that. And so, again, it's given us a very unique perspective. I've helped many over the years, craft their investment thesis in many ways, shapes, and forms, and so is our team. And so we decided to bring that information back in-house. We launched Hypur Ventures 2. We're really focused on plant-touching operations in limited license markets. I mean, I would say that's where we feel the biggest opportunity is. And so we haven't been as active in that as we'd like to be, and the reason being is because Hypur is just, it's been on a massive growth pattern, and so to bounce between the two is very difficult. But I would say our focus is really plant-touching retail opportunities in limited license markets. That's where we see the opportunity in the next, 12 to 18 months.
Very cool. And then the last thing that we can touch on, just because of your background with the New York Mets, looking at cannabis in the public world, and especially with sports, Major League Baseball was one of the first people to take it off their banned substance list. What are your thoughts on baseball? Do you think, I definitely didn't think they were going to be the first one to do it. I thought the NBA, they seemed to be the most progressive when it comes to cannabis, would do it, but baseball was the first one. I have some friends personally that lost their careers, unfortunately, due to drug testing and getting caught with cannabis. Do you think that's a good move for them?
I do. I think when you've been in that world for a long time, you have a different view of it, right? And I think, for me, I was a catcher, and when you play, let's say 160 plus games in 180 days, the wear and tear on your body it's immense. And it doesn't matter what position you play, your travel arrangements aren't always the best. When you're on the road, you don't always have access to things that can help you recover. And so I saw a lot of guys go down the opiate path, or they'd get addicted to different things that were legal, but put them in a bad light. So I think the more that these organizations can open up to I'm going to say natural remedies that can help people avoid the pharmaceutical, or the opiates, I think the better off for everybody. So I think it's a really good move, and I hope that more adopt that policy.
Very cool, man. Well, Tyler, I know you guys are very busy. You've got a lot of clients that you need to service. Before we go, for those, for anybody who's looking to establish curbside pickup or delivery in their own state, how do they get a hold of you? How do they find you? How do they learn more?
I should be very accessible at this point. I'm pretty sure most in the industry have my cell phone number, or at least an email. I have a LinkedIn profile, very easy to reach me through that. So please, if you need anything, even if it's not related to Hypur payments, if you have a question or you need help finding a banking resource or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. Happy to help. We've helped hundreds, if not thousands, over the years get to the right place and avoid, rabbit holes that put them in a bad spot. So again, happy to be a resource.
Absolutely. And I can tell you folks, if you have his contact information, he responds shockingly fast for somebody who's so well known in the industry. So Tyler, thank you again. And we are going to conclude this episode of Elevate Your Grind. Again, find us on the web, www.joinclab.com. Check us out on Facebook or LinkedIn, the Cannabis Lab groups, Instagram at the Cannabis Lab. And we look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Elevate Your Grind.